can't just call everybody sir. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and maybe it was just me, but when I first showed up to the Pentagon as a fresh-faced major, I kind of viewed general officers as these vague and distant creatures that I didn't really have to concern myself with. I mean, I had my general officer, and I was concerned about making her happy, but when it came to all the other general officers cruising through the Pentagon hallways, well, I kind of viewed that as her problem. But that perspective was not really correct. Even as a lowly action officer, you have to be able to recognize and understand all those different general officers. And I argue that there are 6 different ways that a general officer can be referred to or identified. First is just their rank and last name. Major General McNulty. I mean, that one's kind of obvious. Second is their first name, Todd. Now, you may never call them by their first name, but plenty of senior general officers and executives and political appointees will be using their first name. So it helps to know that Todd is Major General McNulty. Oh, and by the way, this is usually their go-by name, not necessarily their legal first name. Lots of people are called Todd, even though their real first name is Liam. Anyways, number 3 is their job title. As much as this job is all about relationships, sometimes it's easier to refer to the job that somebody does than to the person themselves. So people will talk about the Chief of Staff of the Army or the G2 without mentioning any names. And then, a lot of these jobs have these cute little acronyms that are easy to pronounce. The DOT, the DAB, the DUSA. So, more often than not, people will use these abbreviated job titles to refer to the individual. And then, number 5, there's a shortened slang that sometimes gets used that's just the first initial of the general officer's last name followed by their number of stars. So, Major General McNulty would be M2. Finally, the 6th way that you have to be able to identify a general officer is just by their face. You can easily find yourself backseating in some room full of generals where your boss turns to you and says, "Hey, make sure he gets a copy of our draft slides." And you're sitting there like, well, who the hell is he? Don't ask it like that. But so what? Or maybe more to the point is like, cool story, bro, but how is some new action officer going to put any of this to use? I mean, there's hundreds of general officers, and you're telling me that I got to memorize all this crap about them? Yeah, not exactly. In fact, there's a good rule of thumb for how, and more importantly, why you should learn this information about a particular general officer. You know how I often talk about the Pentagon being organized in a 3-layer model, like action officers, directors, and executives. And that whole model is designed so that the multiple layers can compete or cooperate with each other. Well, what that means is that as a new action officer, a lot of your day is spent dealing with action officers from other offices. The purpose of all that action officer level work is to feed information up to your directors as they go to their council of colonels and to your executives as they go to general officer steering committees. So who are the general officers who are going to be at the table when your general officer sits down to deal with the issues that you've been working on? Well, those are going to be the general officers of the action officers you've been dealing with. And that means that you want to prioritize recognizing the general officers that the other action officers represent. In fact, once you start to understand how all these connections fit together, it becomes easier to understand how the whole system works. And of course, understanding how the machine runs can make you a much more successful member of the team. So if you want to see my full mental model of how the Pentagon runs, watch this video.